Nice. Button is hit. I'm
Yep.
tweeting this out just to make sure people know it.
Cool. It's so funny. I tried searching for the YouTube thing just from like another account earlier, and I couldn't even find the Working People YouTube. It was like, wow, wait a second. I have to actually go into the account to copy and paste it.
Yeah, exactly. How do we expect Working People listeners to find our YouTube if we don't know where it is?
Oh my God. So now I'm like, actually, I'm going into the YouTube Working People YouTube account so I can copy that link here.
Sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, we
Okay,
are
so we
live.
should have nice. Hello, everybody. We're getting all set up here. Just coordinating with some friends who may be popping in to join us in a little bit. But yeah, all right. We're live. We can get rolling.
I saw a tweet earlier that was pretty clever. It was like, maybe the most impressive thing about Jesus Christ was that at 30 years old, he had 12 friends. You know?
Yeah, that is among the most impressive feats of our Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
You know what? I had a moment kind of in this vein the other night. So I mean, it's been like just an absolutely exhausting couple weeks, right? And I don't know. I mean, it's just like, I guess in a lot of ways, it's like a good problem to have, you know, at Working People, at the Real News. No easy answers, right? There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of important struggles to cover, a lot of people to talk to, a lot of people to inform. And so it just feels like we've been running all over the place, trying to kind of cover the Kellogg strike, the New York taxi drivers who are on a hunger strike. The Heaven Hill distillery workers just ratified their contract this weekend. So we're going to try to kind of bring folks some follow-up coverage on that. I was actually talking to some folks in the union about that. So there's some really kind of interesting stuff there. But anyway, at like the Real News and Working People, it just feels like we're moving a mile a minute. And so, you know, at the end of each day, I just feel like a sponge that's been wrung out. And then like this weekend, I was all right, I need to like, you know, smoke some weed, like just relax, go chill on the couch and watch something. And so like, you know, I tend to go back to all the old series that I've watched a million times before. And there's probably no series that I've watched more times than Seinfeld. Like we just grew up watching that within our family.
Right.
And so normally I start around like season 4 or 5, because that's like when I feel like it gets good. Or like that was the time when I really got into it as a kid. But this time I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'll start watching it from the very beginning. Like, I don't know if it started in like 89 or 90, but it like looks like noticeably older than the other seasons, right? So anyway, here's where I'm getting to this. So I was just like super tired, super baked, like just eating chips at like 1 a.m, watching Seinfeld. And I had this like moment that blew my mind where like Jerry and George were talking, you know, this is kind of the same conversation they have pretty much throughout the entire series, right? About how, you know, they're not real men. This isn't like what they thought adulthood would be, and yada, yada, yada. And as a kid, I always just was like projecting that well into kind of like some future of adulthood that is always far off. But then in this scene in like season 2, they were at a coffee shop talking about it. And George or someone is just like, man, I'm like 34 years old and like my life's amounted to nothing. And I was like, fuck, I'm as old as these guys are now. It's like, oh shit, I'm a contemporary of the characters on Seinfeld, and that blew my shit wide open.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, I'm 38, so I'm not too much older than you, and I'm not trying to say, hey, I'm eating off like the senior citizens portion of the menu or something, you know. But I do feel like, along with that realization of like, oh shit, I'm like a contemporary to these, you know, I used to look at this as a detached, far off, plenty of time sort of thing, and now it's here and it's immediate and it snuck up on me sort of thing with that. But along with that comes like, this feeling like the world was built for a certain demographic, like all the marketing stuff, all the television, even down to like the speed of editing within content, was built for this demographic that you're now like on the other side of a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of wild to it leads to all sorts of like unexpected get off my lawn kind of moments.
Right. I'm told by my elders that the best way to deal with that is to just lean into it. To just embrace the
Tradition.
dignity of middle age. um no, it was I think the first like experience we probably have with that is sports, right? Because you grow up watching
Yeah.
sports. I mean, these are massive, professional athletes at the peak of their, physical existence and so on and so forth. But there comes a point in your 20s where you're like, oh shit, these people are all younger than I am, and they're making more than I'll ever see in a lifetime, right? Or like, they're doing things with their teams and their bodies that I'll never be able to do. So I feel like that's the first punch to the gut. But yeah, then as you slip into your 30s, you really start kind of I don't know.
So my bad. I hit that button.
Okay.
I didn't know it was
Yeah, you start kind of, I don't know, dealing with your place in the culture in a different way in your 30s. But
yeah, and they're like, oh, this guy, I can't believe he's playing football at 38 or something, and you're like,
yeah, there's a player right. Well, I mean, Jesus, Tom fucking Brady's in his 40s.
Yeah.
Which blows my mind as he's whooping the shit out of my Chicago Bears right now. But that's a story for another time. But yeah, I mean that guy is just nuts. But apart from exceptions like him, they do talk about, like, I think there's one receiver, Emmanuel Sanders. I think he's 33, and they're talking about him like he's a geriatric. And I was like, man, this guy's still like in better shape than like 99% of the population. It's bonkers.
Yeah, I feel like Brett Favre was like instantly an old man as soon as he was done playing football, and he was like 40 or something like that.
Mm-hmm,
I'm like,
mm-hmm.
how did this guy age so quickly here? Or at least that exists in my head. I'm like, Brett Favre exists as an old man on a farm in like, Mississippi in my head at this point. So
that's pretty much right. I mean, so like I think Brett Favre, that genre of athlete has it right, because they accept who they are and they play to their strengths. So like as soon as I saw Brett Favre coming out with like the old man commercial, like products for old man,
yeah,
commercials for old man products, I was like, this guy knows what he's about. I think it was
yeah,
like
yeah,
the copper grip, like pressure sleeves or something. Like he was the
right,
spokesman for that.
right.
Like, hey man, if I was in my 40s, I would listen to Brett Favre on that, and I would buy the shit out of one of those.
I remember coming home one day and checking the mail and going through the junk mail as you do, and I remember seeing like it was like a double like fist bam bam to like my childhood in one like junk mail piece, and it was like Aaron's like Rent-A-Center, and it had like Hulk Hogan next to Troy Aikman, and I was like, oh wow, that kind of stings.
Have you gone back to watch like some of the old like wrestling videos or commercials or interviews or stuff?
Like I mean, the stuff with like Macho Man Randy Savage is always like good for a couple repeats, Yeah.
I literally just rewatched his like the cream always rises to the top.
Oh my god, dude.
It's like this guy was like legit insane, and like for this to be such a popular thing is just so stunning to me. But yeah, I don't know, like it really, I try not to get like super old and boomery about it, but it does feel like the 80s and 90s was a sort of weird cultural space where you could get away with a lot more than you could today, or like there was just at least a little more room for weirdness and experimentation. Not all of it was good, obviously, but like when you look at stuff like that, and when you look at like like Ren and Stimpy and shit, it's like, man, no wonder we were like such a weird generation.
I think of like wrestling is kind of weird to me because I mean, I haven't seen a whole lot of professional wrestling since I was a kid and played like the WWE Nintendo game and stuff with all the classics like Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan and all that stuff. Uh, but what strikes me about wrestling is that like, you know, you get older and you're like, oh, there's an adult like baseball team, like grown men go put baseball uniforms on and they go do that, right? And there's a reason why, like, say you don't find that same thing with like football, you know.
Incredible
But
organizers, and at the time surveying what you
but at a certain point, you're like, wait a second, there's like adults that like do like semi-pro wrestling, and I didn't know about that. And these things happen at like really kind of obscure places that like I don't know, like it's so there's like adult wrestling matches and people take this stuff seriously and they go watch this stuff, and to me that entire culture is just it. I mean, no offense to any wrestling fans that may watch this, right? But I mean, it's incredibly bizarre to me. I'm like, what do you? I mean, where do you buy wrestling uniforms from?
Mm-hmm.
It's like one question. Like, do you make your own? Do you? How do you? I mean, there are gyms you can go box, but like, is there like a wrestling practice facility? And I don't know. That whole world is really bizarre to me.
Well, it makes me really want to go back and re-listen to the two episodes that I opened. God, was it season 3 of Working People? So this was before you came on, when I was still producing it myself. And you can tell from those two episodes, like the audio is not great, but I remember really wanting to talk to some kind of professional wrestlers for the show, right? Primarily folks who are working in that sort of tier of the kind of, I don't know if it's called like amateur professional like circuit, right? But people who do, like dedicate their lives to this and make their living from it. Um, that was kind of who I wanted to talk to, and I ended up interviewing this really kind of incredible person named Angel Blue. And that was an interesting episode because we did talk a bit about like how she got into amateur wrestling, like what the job itself entails. Obviously there's like a lot of training, but like as people may know to some degree, right, there's a lot of it's a hard business to kind of make a living in, right? There are a lot of different people taking cuts of your pay. There are a lot
Right.
of like weird rules about like if audience is above a certain threshold, you get paid that amount. So you got to do a lot of your own promotion and stuff like that. A lot of that is online. But Angel Blue herself, like we were talking after she had sustained like a major neck injury and was like, you know, really fighting hard to get back into the ring, but was also dealing with like, barely being above homeless. Like, I mean, she was really struggling to keep
Wow.
her house. Like, so it was an interview, yeah, that really stuck with me. And I guess I encourage folks watching, not since we treaded on this territory, to go check that out. And then check out the follow-up episode, which was kind of a compilation episode with some other folks who are kind of in that amateur wrestling area. Like one was a former professional amateur wrestler. Some were like folks who had like, if I recall correctly, it was like a primarily like queer based community that had started a group called Wrestling with Friends in like Kansas City. And like they would have these big wrestling
Wow.
parties, and it would get like really intense, but like everyone really loved it. So anyway, point being is that the topic came up and it reminded me of since this is a Working People live stream, it reminded me of an actual Working People episode that we've recorded. But we
Wow.
should definitely do another one like that very soon.
Well, as the Working People producer, I should be familiar with that episode, and I'm glad I did not say anything offensive towards our wrestler enthusiast listenership. Uh, yeah, I, that's really wild, man, to think of like, uh, I mean, just being a musician and earning my living through music at times, like it's a constant struggle to deal with these different uh, things within like, herding your cats with your band, to carry them around and everybody gets a cut. And then how do you sustain yourself or, work enough even, and all these kind of these elements that are just characteristics of someone who tries to monetize their passion, you know, would apply to professional wrestling as well. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, monetize your passion. I like the way that you put that because it puts a finger on what I feel like I thought I was doing with everything that turned out to be my livelihood, and I guess I'm still wondering if that was the right choice. Right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Wow.
yeah, I mean it's a quandary, right? Especially when you grow up thinking like the do what you love stuff, and for me, it was like I was, I guess, going through grad school, when I kind of last confronted this question, right? And I was like, well, do I want to go with like I don't know, do I want to stick with this like journalism stuff, the public scholarship stuff, the podcasting stuff, or is that just kind of like a side thing? Like where is my passion, right? So like
Right,
trying to kind of
right.
identify it and then monetize it, it really does complicate your relationship with that. But I imagine we'll kind of be able to talk about that a bit more with the great folks that we've got coming into this live stream. We definitely want to kind of hear from our great guests, and if any of y'all are watching, definitely leave some comments in the YouTube chat or tweet at us, and we'll try to kind of address your questions. But I guess since you caught us, we started en medias res, like Jules and I we're kind of chatting a bit before we thought people were going to hop on, but I guess I might as well give like a little quick introduction here before we actually welcome our first guest on the live stream, who we're really excited to see here. And we got some more great folks popping in for y'all. But, as I mentioned in the introduction to this week's Working People episode, which was an interview that I did with UAW member and GM worker in Kansas City, Justin Mayhew. That was a really great episode. So if you haven't checked that one out, definitely go check it out. But if you're here, you probably did check it out because I talked about the live stream in that introduction. Unlike the listener hangout session, right? This isn't something that we've been planning for a couple months. This was something that's more of a product of the moment. As I've hinted at in some of the other Working People introductions, one of the reasons that, we were struggling to keep our heads above water and get out as much content as we wanted to last month was because it was very busy on my end, but also Jules was going through a lot of stuff that has been very tough on him and his family, and we wanted to kind of put this live stream together in the hopes that we could help raise some money for them, as his mom goes through dialysis treatment, and the whole family is pulling together, and we want to help however we can. So that's why we're doing this live stream. That's why you're watching here. And if you're watching this after the live stream has finished, that does not mean that we're not still trying to raise money for Jules and his family. So please go to the GoFundMe that should be in the description. It's also in the show notes for this week's episode. It is also on Jules's Twitter page. It should be on our Working People pages. So you should be able to find the GoFundMe, but that's really why we're here, right? We're here to raise money for Jules and his family. And we're calling upon our amazing, Working People family to help us spread the word there. So Jules, I guess before we kind of get rolling with some of our amazing friends and guests, did you want to say anything to folks watching about that?
Yeah, it's a really wild thing, man. Like, I took this trip to Texas and was not it was not the trip that I thought that I would have. My mother, her health started failing while I was down there, and so I did everything I could while I was down there to sort of uh, to make sure that like any dietary stuff my mother was abiding by, just like that she needed dialysis was shocking, really, and there's a whole diet of different things they can have and can't have and what have you, and I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to South Texas, but it's nothing but like meat, cheese, and tortillas down there, you know. So like it, getting all that stuff together and making green drinks, all that stuff is what I was kind of doing in Texas, as you know, helping my mother out. And again, this just kind of snuck up on us. It was shocking when it happened, and part of the reason why I started this GoFundMe, the main reason is that my mother's a school teacher. She has insurance. That's okay. But what it was really kind of striking is like something uh, to me was that I understood that when she went on medical leave, she was not going to get paid for her time that she was out of medical leave, despite the fact that this now marks she's going into retirement now, and she's basically forced to because of these health conditions. And so her not being paid while this is going on, conversations started happening around my house about like, well, maybe my family needs to sell the house. What are we gonna do to make ends meet? And I got back up here, man. I got back to New York, and you know, the anxiety around all of this was so much that I thought, man, maybe I should you know, explain this in a video, and maybe I should start a GoFundMe. And and if it raises any money, then, and I mean, I thought, I was like, if this doesn't go anywhere at all, you know, like, can I mean, there's a whole process of like making this video, knowing I'm going to tear up during the process of explaining this, and really being like publicly vulnerable. And I was okay with like, if it didn't raise any money, I was okay with that video being out there of me explaining this, and that sort of vulnerability in that video. But thankfully now we've raised a little over $5,000 at this point, and I am just incredibly grateful and thankful, and you know, to everyone that's donated. I can't, I tell people, because it's really like, it may sound trite, but I'm just not able to express how much that means to me, and how much that means to my family, and how much it helps. And you know, I could, you know, go on at length about how much it means, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's such a tremendous thing to try and express that I don't think words would ever do it justice. So so I just, if you've already donated, if you have shared this link, I mean, I also really appreciate that, and can express how much that helps, and spreading the word, and Max, you know, coming up with the idea for the live stream, and really calling everybody in on this is like, I'm so incredibly moved. I mean, like, communism intensifies, you know, at this point, like really, like, I gotta tell you, man, what's funny is, you know, so some people sent me some PayPals and it's only that portion has only been a couple $100, but the kind of love notes that came in with that PayPal was amazing, because you know, one of them sent me like $100 and said, "Communism will win," is the note. And I thought that was really great, right? So I sent that to my mother, and showed her that. And the other day, you know, my mother texts me. She says, "Hey, you know, I'm really thankful to you and everything you've done, and I'm really grateful to your, or my, or our comrades." So, you know, it's like my mother even understands like solidarity now, and how powerful, right, man, like how powerful that force is. And I got to think the other day, just that, you know, if you serve your community, if you care after those you care about, and love, and you really let the people around you that mean the world to you know that they mean the world, you can do all of those things, right? And that is wonderful, as you should do, as one ought to. But the feeling of knowing that that community comes together to do something for you, like as I'm speaking, gives me goosebumps and chills. And I mean, it's like, I just, you know, like I said before, I can't express all of it, man. All I know is like my heart is like the Grinch, how it expands to 4 times its size kind of thing. It's like, I just feel like I'm just so grateful for all this shit. And so I'm incredibly just, you know, and thank you again, Max, for organizing this live stream.
Of course, man. Yeah. I'm a sucker for those Grinch moments. Yeah, so like I know how powerful they can be, you know, when this world makes us so cynical. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we are all we've got, right? And so, you know, it's always heartening to me to see folks really rally and build support and show solidarity, whether that be for a friend in need, like our dear brother Jules here and his family, whether that be for a strike fund for workers that, you know, listeners to this show have never met before, right, but feel a very intense connection to, or as one of our first guests here can attest, right, you know, folks who are learning about kind of other important and undercovered stories that have impacted the lives of other working people in places like in places like Ohio, where in fact there is a, you know, kind of rampant culture of police brutality. But I'll let him kind of talk about it because I'm really excited actually that he hopped on. Brian, why don't you say hi to the good folks and tell them a little bit about your work, because I think, you know, again, it does definitely kind of enter into that whole conversation as well.
Yo, man, Max, there's so much serendipity as I was just kind of listening in and hearing. That's why I kind of jumped on like early on when you were talking about like finding your path and working and monetizing your passion and all that stuff. And I'm in that thick of that journey right now. So this is actually the first time I think you and I have seen each other and spoke. We did a quick call, but I'm a journalist based out of Cleveland, Ohio, around Cleveland, Ohio, and focused really heavily on police abuse, the local political corruption by police influence, and prosecutorial misconduct. And I'm about a year and change into this. I fell into my working path I'm from Youngstown, Ohio, and grew up with a mom that worked retail, like she's a saint. Like she was managing like retail stores and then working at 7-Eleven, Toys R Us, and seasonal, all these jobs because my dad was in a spiral of alcoholism that took a long time to hit bottom. And so through high school, I was just kind of trying to like stay out of her way. Eventually they got divorced and she wanted to move to Cleveland. And I was like, I'm not changing high school. I just had found my people in theater and sort of find myself. And theater was actually what got me into college, because I got a performance scholarship for the local YSU, the Youngstown State, and a high ACT score got me another $1,000. And that covered like 2/3 of my tuition. So I could cover the rest working in the mall. But I'm a terrible student. I'm just not built for the modality of academia and I had a hobby since high school of just building web pages. Like back in 96, a friend of mine showed me with all the free AOL accounts we had, we could just, hey man, you can just make a website. And I was like, what? And so I started coding like the website from like the speech team and all kinds of goofy stuff. And about 2 years into college, I got a part-time job I saw posted for a coder, HTML. And I jumped on that. And as I was losing my scholarships because my GPA just dropped down below the minimum 2.5, I just decided, I don't know what a theater degree was going to get me. I think the internet's going to be a thing. So I'm going to focus on that. And I suddenly like just found that I wasn't an idiot like school made me feel like, or this like I was not above a 2.5. I was a below average person, because in the work environment with real consequences, not intangible abstract metrics like grades, I like was just, I want to learn graphic design and I want to learn programming. And so my arc of my career then was in web development and then design and then programming, and just acquiring all these skills from working around people. But the thing is, I had no political alignment. My earliest political discussion with my family was prompted by me. One day I just said, like, what? I keep hearing Democrat and Republican on the news. What is that? What are those? And I forget who told me this, but it was just said, well, Republicans want less taxes, so we're Republican. And didn't think
End of
about
story, right?
Yeah, and I don't even know if they thought about it that deeply either. You know, they weren't ideological people on and like religious or even politically or anything. They're just working people trying to get by. And so my political consciousness didn't really happen until 9/11, because I just realized I'm like, I don't know anything that's going on. And so from that point over, I've just been someone who's a constant obsessive consumer of history and news and so getting to this, to bring the arc to a close, I found myself just mired in the world of corporate advertising. That's who I was building websites for. And I worked for like some of the biggest agencies in New York on like Citibank. I worked for Big Pharma, P&G, like just saw behind all kinds of nasty curtains and immersed in what the beast of corporate America is. And I got myself back to Cleveland eventually. And Jules, I'd love to rap music with you sometime. I found my inner musician living in New York too. But so I got back to Cleveland. I spent about 2 years here. And then in the summer of George Floyd, just in my house, thinking everything was falling apart. And then I had this story land in my lap about a shady organizer here in Cleveland, just uncovered on like a Reddit comment on some obscure place. And I just took the person seriously and pulled it apart. And that ended up being my first published story. And it was also where I first intersected with Black Lives Matter Cleveland. And that story was basically about someone who was pretending to have a relationship with Tamir Rice's mother, Samaria, in order to put on a fundraiser in the park where Tamir was killed without her consent at all. And it pissed me off because the same day it was happening, there was a really important action going on downtown for a recent victim of police violence, Desmond Franklin, who was shot by an off-duty Cleveland police officer. So when I was writing that story, I didn't want to just leave someone with like anger at this jerk who was putting on a shady action. I wanted to call attention to the good work that Black Lives Matter Cleveland were doing, because they respect families. They don't raise up anyone's name if the family doesn't want them to. And they have strong ideas about how the pressure points of government work here. And so that first story just led to me really being on the beat and staying close to BLM Cleveland. And it was Kareem Henton, who I was following him. I was covering him at a rally where he was speaking. And afterwards, he came up to me and asked if I had any interest in producing a video about a gentleman who was killed in Euclid, Ohio, one of the ring suburbs around Cleveland, by the name of Luke Stewart. Luke was sleeping in his car. Someone on the street called in a call about a suspicious vehicle. Police arrived and basically manufactured a reason to kill him. And so I took Kareem up on that, and I reached out to Roger Glenn Hill, which is how I actually came to know Max. Roger is serendipitously just a filmmaker that moved into my neighborhood, and I was a friend of a friend, and we connected. And so when I was approached about doing this story, I don't know what I'm doing with documentaries. I was, reasonably confident to be able to write articles, but I reached out to Roger, and Luke's story, once we got all the information and we spoke to his sister, the lawyer, and got a deeper background from BLM Cleveland, we realized his story doesn't exist in isolation. It's surrounded by just storm of brutality and so many horrifying instances that demonstrate how over-policed Black people are in Euclid, Ohio. And that led to the documentary series that Real News Network was awesome enough to pick up and stream, called State of Injustice. And I'm really happy to say that, you helped a lot, with the ultimate goal of that was the family wanted more people to know what had happened to Luke and the struggle that they've been fighting. And now I'm just seeing like this rolling wave of new interest in Luke's story out there. And so, yeah, I don't know if I sprawled into too many places with my opening, but I hope I brought it back to where we actually connected, Max.
No, brother, that was great. I mean, if like we said, this is a live stream where we've got some great friends kind of dropping in, and to anyone who is going to be dropping in, the main thing is to introduce folks to them and their work, plug the shit out of the great work that they're doing. If we have time, we want to like kind of talk about Halloween and Striketober and all that good stuff, but ultimately, as we said at the top, this is really kind of an impromptu effort from our great community here to try to raise some money for our amazing producer Jules and his family while his mother goes through dialysis, which, as we know, the American healthcare system, everything is fucking inordinately expensive. And so it's been really amazing to see folks sharing the fundraiser, donating to it. Our hearts are really kind of full with all of y'all who have offered to hop in on the live stream, even for a little bit to help us with this effort. But yeah, I mean, just to kind of pick up on that before we bring some other folks on here. I mean, first of all, I cannot recommend highly enough that folks check out Brian and Roger's mini documentary series that they produced, or that was executive produced by Black Lives Matter Cleveland, that we were honored to run. Oh, go ahead.
I want to clarify one thing too, because it's funny how outside of Cleveland, people will hear BLM, and there's a lot of like baggage that comes with BLM for different reasons. And I specifically like to call out that executive produced really means like they set it in motion. But when we did a crowdfund, we didn't get any money from them. And we crowdfunded to finish the 3 episodes after we completed one. We kicked back to them because, and I've been in their offices so much, and what they're doing is getting money to people here in Cleveland, helping people navigate the atrocious jail and bail system. And so I just like to point that out, like BLM Cleveland, they are doing the work here, and they are completely like their own entity.
Yeah, definitely. And if, like, as I was saying, it was really an honor for us at The Real News to, republish and host that mini documentary series and try to get it to a wider audience. Because it really is incredible work, really important work. It's a 3-part investigation into the sort of reign of terror of the Euclid Police Department, right? 4-part series. In part 3, just to Brian's point, we, at the end of the mini documentary, there's a panel that The Real News' Jessel Noor hosted with folks from BLM Cleveland and folks who are involved in those cases. So you can really see what Brian's talking about there, right? About the important work that BLM Cleveland is doing. But yeah, you should absolutely watch that mini documentary series. If you go check out The Real News, you'll find it there. The first episode is the killing of Luke Stewart. You should absolutely check out Brian's work, Roger's work, support BLM Cleveland. But yeah, Brian, we're gonna have to have you back on, man, so we can kind of dig into that Lordstown connection and everything else.
Oh yeah, I'd love to do that. I'm gonna hop out, but I appreciate you guys, and definitely I'm trying to find that how to monetize my passion, which is journalism, and finding that I really need to be dedicated to being independent, because I'm seeing how much it twists up a lot of local journalists here when they're stymied by a lot of the editors that aren't willing to really reconcile with how bad things are. So I hope everyone pays attention to Cleveland. We have some really great stuff on the ballot with issue 24, a chance for real citizen accountability. And is that Adam Johnson?
Yep.
Hi.
I am such a huge fan of Citations Needed. I just have to say, it's one of the podcasts I tell everyone all the time. Citations Needed.
Thank you
for that. So happy to see you, but I'm going to hop off and let you jump in. So thanks, Max.
Thanks, brother. Great to see you.
Thank you.
All right, well, there you go. So, we have waiting in the green room our boy Adam Johnson from Citations Needed, also a brilliant writer on myriad of things, but definitely like the go-to expert on media criticism, someone whose work I treasure, quite frankly. So Adam, thank you for
How's it
joining
going?
us, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I can't see. I need to grab my glasses. Can you give me 1 second?
Yeah,
I
we got
realized
you.
that I'm looking into it. I'm using my phone and I'm looking. That's why I'm squinting. I'm not doing the blue steel thing. I can't see. Hold
Yeah,
on.
grab your
Hold
glasses,
on.
man.
I'm gonna grab my glasses, but I can hear you. So here. All right.
So while
Sorry about
Adam's
that.
grabbing his glasses, like this
Yes.
actually,
Hi.
hey, there you are. Can you see
Now
us?
I can see everybody. Yes.
I thought you
Thanks
were
for
just like
Sorry.
mean mugging us for a while, man. It was like
No,
you
it's everyone's like, why do you always squint? And I'm like, it's not a Zoolander thing. I can't see. Sorry. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, this is kind of upsetting to me because I've always found the squint quite endearing, but now I know that it's just just that you
No, it's
can't
not.
see.
It's not an affect.
Okay, cool.
At least not. At least not entirely an affect. Maybe on some subconscious level. But anyway, how's it going? How is everything?
We're doing good, man. Yeah, we really appreciate you hopping in. You know, we're just kind of hanging out, really trying to spread the word about this fundraiser for our amazing producer Jules, but in the process, we also like wanted to just kind of have a fun hangout to talk about a mishmash of things that folks have been asking us about, whether that be Striketober, whether that be kind of spooky season stuff, or whether
Okay.
that be, like kind of anything in between. So I could ask you about your fantasy team or the Bears, but I feel like that may be
Well,
more painful
that's a
than,
little sensitive. It's a sensitive. It's a spooky conversation indeed.
yeah, you
They
want to talk
lost.
about
They
spooky.
lost 30. They lost 38-3. Which is not as bad as I thought it was going to be when it was 21-0 in the first quarter. But no, it turns out the Bears are not very good. Their offense is basically non-existent. Their defense is pretty good, but there's only so much they can do when Tampa Bay starts at the 25-yard line of Chicago's 25-yard line every possession.
Yeah.
But we're okay with that. I've sort of resigned to the fact that they're not going to be very good this year. They're always sort of mediocre. They're always 9-7 because that way you never have like a tear down and rebuild. You're just always mediocre. So I think they're destined to be 9-7 for the next 20 years, or 8-8.
I feel I'll never have.
No, they can't be 9-7 anymore. They added a game. Sorry. I mean, I think
Right.
they're 9-8 now. They can split the difference.
I feel I'll never have as high of a moment as like I feel cheated because when I moved to Chicago, that was what, in 2005. And I think it was like what, the year after that we went to the Super Bowl and we started off.
2006, the Bears went to the Super Bowl. That's right. They
Yeah.
lost to the Colts.
And we started off like with a kickoff return to the
From Devin
house.
Hester. Yeah.
And like I was going ape shit in Hyde Park at a bar Louis, and I was like, this is we're taking this home, and then we just blew it.
Yeah.
We have the Jay Cutler era.
There's a groundswell campaign to get Devin Hester into the Hall of Fame because he didn't have that long of a career or even that superlative of a career, but he was the best ever at a very specific thing, which is kickoff returns, which by the way should be totally banned. They're horribly dangerous. I mean, the whole sport's dangerous, but they're actually more dangerous than usual. John Blah made a very convincing case that they should get rid of the kickoff return altogether because it's totally pointless and literally just causes horrible injuries. But no, that was peak because I think he like called it too. The Babe Ruth. He's like, I'm gonna run back the first possession of the whole Super Bowl, and he did, and that was it. Then it was all downhill from there. It's been downhill ever since, actually.
Yeah. No, that's right, hasn't it? It's been literally all downhill since Devin Hester took that one to the house.
I'm a bit of a carpetbagger though. I was not a Bears fan until very recently because I moved to Chicago 4 years ago, and then it occurred to me that I'm never leaving Chicago. It's one of those places you never leave. It's like Hotel California. So I sort of said, okay, well, if I'm going to be here, I may as well do what the locals do, root for the exceedingly mediocre team owned by a 99-year-old woman, who they still take the road games, interestingly enough.
So were you because Jules is also from Texas, so were you an embarrassing Dallas fan or what?
No, I grew up an Oilers fan. I grew up a very hardcore Oilers fan, and they left when I was 13, which dates me quite a bit, and that tore my heart out. I remember just being totally devastated by that. Sorry, I wasn't I was 13. They left in 97. back in aught 97. And that destroyed me. I'll never forget that. Bud Adams, they moved him to Tennessee. And then I never really had another NFL team until I moved here. I sort of always kind of, I kind of go in and out of following NFL. I was more of a college football fan, which is my ultimate problematic phase, for various reasons. But I was never raised a Dallas Cowboys fan. We were always raised to hate the Dallas Cowboys because I was born in Houston. And my uncle worked for the Houston sports radio station. And we were, and he used to call the Rice Owl games back in the day. And we were raised to always hate the Cowboys, which was hard in the 90s because they were, they went through Super Bowls in 4 years. And when I was in my formidable years, but in Chicago, it's a very much football town. I mean, everybody talks about them. Everyone, you go downtown or to any park on a Sunday, and especially the opening game, and it's all Bear stuff. So it's like you sort of have to like the Bears here. It's kind of, you're seen as suspect, or maybe if you're from Wisconsin, you can wear a Packers thing, sort of have a reason. But outside of that, it's they're very passionate about their football team here. And they all agree they hate Matt Nagy.
Yeah, Matt Nagy is the bane of my fucking existence and needs to be run out of town. I think that's a cause we could all get behind. And
I think so too.
Yeah, I think that's something that can unify the city. But
I think the moment when Tony Romo was like, here's the play they're going to run next, and they would run it every single time. And it was like, I think he may not be running the most exciting and unpredictable offense. It's sort of a classic example of a man trying not to get fired. We've all been there though, bare minimum, right. Take no risks. So anyway,
whomst among us, has not
pulled a Nagy. Has not pulled a Nagy where you're just trying to skate by and collect the check until the inevitable firing comes.
Well, let me ask you this, because I have a whole spiel about how, like, I take great pride having grown up in Southern California and hated all LA based teams, but maybe we may have to, because I fucking hate the Lakers. I hate the Lakers. I hate Lakers fans. Thing? Okay. Oh, sorry. Say that again.
Was that like a mindless rebellion thing? Was it like to be different?
Half and half. Yeah.
So I had a cousin who grew up, we grew up in San Antonio, and he was like, he just randomly in 2008 became a Warriors fan. And he was like, he just chose them because he wanted to like be annoying, and he picked the worst team in the league. But he guessed right.
yeah, exactly. That was right horse to bet on.
Some people will do that.
It was partially that. I mean, like, because the whole Mexican side were Dodgers fans. But there was something about the Dodgers I didn't like. Plus, like, it was a lot cheaper and closer for us to go to Angel Stadium, so that's who we rooted for. And the Clippers were right across the freeway from them, and that's when the Clippers sucked. So there was something endearing about rooting for the underdog. We're the only person instead of Jack Nicholson, we had like a sad Billy Crystal. Like, on
Billy Crystal, stands. That was the only celebrity that the Clippers had for like 20 years was Billy Crystal. And now they're all there. now they go to the games.
Yeah. So there was a little. There's a little, mindless rebellion, and also just kind of like rooting for the underdog thing. But let me do this actually, because we have another great friend on, the great Luis Feliz Leon. And I actually wanted to ask you guys the similar questions, right? Because you guys, so since this is the spooky season, right, and we're trying to also have a little fun here while we're trying to raise money for Jules and his family so that they can pay for his mom's dialysis. Everyone here knows that working people does not happen without Jules. It is incredible and beautiful for me to record these interviews and then just send them to Jules, and then boom, they're up on the feed. They sound great. So if you like the show, a huge amount of that is because of Jules. So please, if you can, help us share this GoFundMe fundraiser. Donate what you can, help us spread the word. But that's, of course, why we're doing this live stream. And we're honored to be joined by, Adam Johnson and Luis, our good friends who both do incredible work that everyone should go support. If you're not listening to Citations Needed, I don't know what's wrong with you. If you're not reading Luis's work, you need to, check yourself, like real soon. And I had like kind of topic, like, specific questions to ask you guys, but I also know that this is like Halloween. You guys both have like young kids. So I was going to actually ask you, like, what sort of like fun Halloween things are y'all doing right around now? I've been very curious to know if you got any kind of cute excursions or fun family costumes planned or anything like that.
So my kids, Luis Feliz Leon, staff writer and organizer at Labor Notes. Thanks, Max, for having me on, and thanks for making visible the indispensable work that Jules Taylor does to make Working People podcast possible. So anyone that's tuning in, contribute to that GoFundMe. We need to stick together. Let's fight the boss, and let's spread the love among workers. My kids are nerds. So my daughter, my daughter wants to be a paleontologist for Halloween. So that's her costume. I think we're gonna go to the Museum of Natural History in New York for Halloween. I think that's where we're gonna
nerd.
So yeah, my little one, my 2-year-old, dresses up. She has a hand-me-down of Wonder Woman. So yeah, so she's part of the zeitgeist in terms of the superhero genre.
And then I guess there is a somewhat, well, I don't know, there's a proud tradition, right, of like the nerd turning into the superhero, right? We got Clark Kent's supposed to be a bit of a nerd, right? Indiana Jones is supposed to be a bit of a nerd. I don't know if it quite translates. I'm trying to give your daughter an assist here. Adam, I don't know if you heard that, but we're talking
Sorry,
fun.
my camera fell. Yeah, for Halloween, my 8-month-old is going as a salad. We were out eating with my niece who's 11, and we were trying to debate what costume to do. And they're like, "How about a visual pun? We'll do Caesar salad. She's going to go as Caesar. He'll go as the salad." But then it occurred to me that's not even actually really a pun, since salad is just the word. It's actually not a pun at all. So we are dressing him up as a salad, incidentally not a Caesar salad. And here I'll show you. I'm attempting to construct a salad costume using this plastic salad thing that I got. So here's like a tomato. Here's a tomato.
Oh my
There's a
God.
little lettuce. There's a little cucumber. You can see the cucumber there, and a little yellow peppers. And then we're putting them in the green onesie. And we're gonna add. I don't know if I should glue these on. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm gonna do that tomorrow. And so he's gonna be a salad. It's not the most inventive costume, but I think it'll be adorable. It even comes a little palmer with the tongs on.
Oh, that is like unbelievably adorable.
Yeah, because. And then little lettuce leaves. See, when they're 8, it's all about just, the photo ops for the grandmas and such. So anyway, that's what we're doing. And then she'll be Julius Caesar. And I don't think I'm going to do a costume. I feel like I'm too old.
Go at least go as Matt Nagy or something.
Go as fired Matt Nagy.
I feel
You
you on
guys
the
give-
uniform thing, man, or on the no costume thing, man. I realize that I at any given point I'm just already in a Jay Leno outfit. I mean, wears like denim all the time,
Yeah. You should just say you're working on cars and you're Jay Leno.
Well,
No,
I
I'm not above the costume. Like, if you get invited to a costume party, you definitely don't want to be the guy who doesn't wear the costume to the costume party. Like, those people should be on a government list. But like, if you but if I'm doing the trick-or-treating thing, again, this is my first time as a father doing trick-or-treating. I'm like, do I wear a costume? Like, what's appropriate? Or am I like the parental unit? I don't know. I'm figuring it out. I have a week to figure this out.
Luis, you got any help for Adam?
Yeah, no, man. I haven't dressed up for Halloween with my kids. I'm usually part of the parental unit. So it's okay.
Like you're
right,
basically a cop. I mean, you can't.
Oh no, God, no.
You're the fun police. You're there to make sure everyone's in line. You're not there to have fun yourself. No, I don't know. I also don't want to be a buzzkill, because I have like an apartment, like I don't have like a home. Like if I had a home or something approximating a home, I would do like decorations and stuff. But when you're in an apartment and you have no like forward facing, seems like it kills the spirit, you know. Plus you can't, like, kids can't even come in, we can't even do candy. So like seems like a lot of that part is not there either. So I don't know.
I mean,
Maybe
I'm
maybe
gonna
I should-
admit this in front of all of you guys, but when my brother Zach and I were in Chicago, we were undergrads at the University of Chicago, and we were feeling really homesick. And Halloween was always like a big part of our childhood. Like we were the embarrassing Mexican family on the block that just like put decorations fucking everywhere, and just embarrassed everyone on the block. We went trick-or-treating. It was always a lot of fun. So like, you know, this was my first year there. We were feeling homesick. No one was really doing anything except going to like, you know, parties later in the evening. So he calls me up and he was like, "Hey, what are you up to?" And I was like, "Nothing." He's like, "Do you want to go to Lincoln Park and go trick-or-treating?" And I was like, "Yes." He's like, "I'll be outside in 5." And he rolls up, tosses me like a gorilla mask, and we just kind of like go walking up and down the street. Like, I'm embarrassed now, but I say this to all of you folks watching.
Wait, how old are you in this story?
I was 18 at this point.
You were trick-or-treating at 18?
Yes, Adam Johnson. I was 18 and trick-or-treating.
Finger wag. Look at the finger wag. Way too old.
Yes, it was way
foul.
too old, but we had fun. But yeah,
No,
if
I
you
used to
think
win
that's
it, you know,
embarrassing,
yeah.
all right. If you think that's embarrassing, here I'll show you guys this real quick, and then I'll shut up. But I pulled these up just for such an occasion. And Jules, I'm gonna, for those watching the live stream, to hopefully encourage Adam and Luis to not be the fun police, but to get in on the fun.
No, I'm open. I'm open. I just need costume ideas.
All right, well, here you go. I got 3 for you. So
What
here's
is that?
So this is Max in first grade as the Wolfman,
Okay.
with my mom's like extension like nails on it or something.
Okay.
Let's see, what was the other one? This is Batmax.
Oh, that's
like,
cute.
Yeah, big old cheek.
How old are you there?
I must have been like 1. I don't know, maybe 2. I don't know. All my sense of time's all messed up. I was very young, but I've always had a big ass head with big cheeks, so it's hard to place.
Sure, I feel you.
Here's the coup de grace. This is me as a Care Bear.
Oh man.
Yep. There you go. That's the legend. So I feel like either of you could pull that off if you were so inclined.
Well, see, if I'm gonna do a costume, I want to like do it well. I don't want to do the half-ass thing where people like, you know, they put on a hat and they're like, "I'm a cowboy" or something. Like, you want to like actually think about it. So I don't know.
I think my parents ruined Halloween for me, man, when I was growing up, because I would go trick-or-treating and then they would take all the candy. I grew up in New York, and they would forbid me from eating it because it could be poison.
Because it'd be poison.
Yeah, it could be poison.
or the razor blade. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they would just go and buy a bag of Kit Kats and say, "Here, you can eat this." So it just defeated the whole purpose of going out and getting candy. That's kind of soured me.
There was like one case of like a kid getting poisoned like in the 70s. And then I think our parents, and I don't know how old you are, but our generation of parents were like, because my father would always test the candy, which was him just eating it. Yeah, he was like, "Let me check that for poison."
Yeah, no. My wife grew up in the Bronx, and she would go to white people's houses to trick or treat because she wouldn't trick or treat in the Bronx. So they had to leave the state to experience Halloween.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Well, Adam, I don't not to like put you on the spot, you know, like,
Yeah.
but maybe as a group, like this, because this is kind of citations needed related, right? Like, where did that fucking panic about like weed being in candy or razor blades in candy?
I think there was a razor blade like drug. It wasn't weed, I don't think. I think it was like PCP or something. I want to say like there were a few like isolated cases of it happening, like, but I want to say like in the 60s or 70s, like a long time. And then like the candy danger was, I mean, that was like the peak, you know, the 80s were the peak of stranger danger, like 90s. So I think that we just sort of caught the wave. But yeah, I remember hearing a lot about the sort of mystical, the mythical poison candy. I'm sure it happened sometimes, but you know, a lot of things happen.
Jules, did you get any of that growing up?
Yeah, I got the dad who has to test the candy and like the whole security process of like, don't eat anything until we get home, and I can look through all of it and make sure it's okay. And then they hand it back to you, and you're like, why are all the Kit Kats missing, Dad? What's up?
Yeah.
You know?
No, it was
Yeah.
definitely a scam. It was definitely a
Oh, dude.
parental psyop. Yeah.
100%, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So they would have prima nocta rights over your candy.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, like, because I feel like it's dawned on enough people now, as the generation that was scared by that stuff, from local news and from our parents. I feel like there was a point where we all grew up, started smoking weed, and we were like, wait, I'm not going to just give this away to people. Like, that sounds like bullshit to me. Right?
So I have thoughts about that viral tweet that they were like, well, be careful that your candy doesn't have weed. Like, everyone was dunking on that, and I get that it's propaganda. At the same time, like, there needs to be better regulation about how they package weed. Like, a lot of states have pretty loose regulations, and a lot of that shit does look like actual candy, and they're clearly marketing it to children. So like, I'm gonna take the mantle of Tipper Gore here and be like, I actually think that like rapacious corporate weed peddlers probably should have packaging standards that are not so lackadaisical. Because I do think that no one would give away weed for free or on purpose, I do think it could happen by accident fairly easily with some of those packaging standards. That's my Tipper Gore take on that. I think that as you move from the kind of draconian, criminalization of weed into legalizing it, I think you have to think, critically about how do you sort of treat it like tobacco or alcohol, where you sort of make sure that these companies are not marketing to children, which they clearly do, just as tobacco companies and liquor companies do. And I don't know, that's kind of a fine balance. But anyway, not to be a buzzkill, not to be square.
No, I mean, I think that's definitely a fair point. And I mean, like, it sure as hell, I guess like the cigarettes like here, are not as bad as they used to be. But yeah, if you look at like the vaping stuff, like it's very, very clearly marketed to underage people. So
for sure. I mean, that's how you get a new market. You tap into an undertapped market, and you get people, addicted to or not addicted, but preferring because you can't really get addicted to weed, but preferring your product at a young age. So I don't know. Part of me was like, I'm not with the cops in this one, but like, I don't know. A lot of these companies are pretty unscrupulous. They don't really care about, getting kids drugged. They don't give a shit. Drugged, as it were, Anyway, so.
Speaking of like parental psyops, man, like, my grandfather was like one level beyond that. He'd be like, yeah, I'll give you a candy, but you can't eat this. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, if you see on the package, it says this will break your jaw. It's called a jaw breaker. I'm like, oh, well, I can't eat that. And then pretty soon I just like picked up on it. My mom's like, you gonna eat those? I'm like, I can't eat those. Why not? I was like, well, I can't eat those because they're red hot, do it.
And then you reached a certain age and you're like, wait a second, I was lied to.
Yeah.
By the people I trusted the most. Yeah.
What was the most embarrassing thing that you believed for far too long into your life?
I'm going to abstain from this because it's pretty embarrassing.
I'm trying to think. Like, I know that maybe it was because of the Rugrats episode, but I definitely believe that if I ate a watermelon seed, a watermelon would grow in my stomach, like for much longer than I should have.
Yeah. I believed in Santa Claus way too long. Like, embarrassingly long, like past due, like just a classic, like I did not want to let it go, even though I had like stubble. Like, I mean, okay, maybe not that bad, but like, like I was pretty old. I think I was like one of the last in my class. And I, sort of deep down inside, I knew it. But it was sort of a, rigid, beliefs. That would probably be the thing I was most, embarrassed about. Because, I discuss that with Sarah all the time. Like, are we going to do Santa Claus with our kid? And of course, being the red diaper baby atheist, she's like, you don't lie to children. We're not going to tell them that. And part of me is like, I get that. But also, it's such an innocent lie. But also, when you find out, it does crush your soul. So it's a balancing act, because you don't want to raise the kid who's like, Santa's not real when they're like 4 years old, because then everybody hates you. So it's a tough one. I don't know where I stand on it, to be honest.
If you don't tell your kid about Santa Claus, or if you do, either way, just don't. I don't know. In my experience, like my dad had to be Santa Claus at one point, and so there was this whole like talking about like one step removed from a psyop. It was like, hey, Santa Claus is real, but I'm going to dress up as him, and you're going to have your friends there, and you can't tell them that I am Santa Claus,
right?
And so then they're like, hey, your dad is Santa Claus. I'm like, no way, dude. No, he's no, and then it's just like Santa Claus, like the jig is up before it was ever supposed to be up, but now it's up in this way that's like, wait a second. No, and
I've been lied to
like,
the whole time.
Yeah, I was like, Mom, what about Jesus? Is this like Santa Claus here? So just
no, I had a similar experience, because when you get to a certain age, you start to get pretty skeptical, pretty logical. I want to say 8 or 9, and we would go to Sunday school and we learn about the Trinity, and which is like the thing that's baffled theologians for centuries. It split up churches. It led to the schism of the Roman Eastern Orthodox and Catholic Church. Sort of something that's plagued philosophers for like, wait a second. So Jesus is both man and God, and then there's this Holy Spirit, which seems like a little retconned in to kind of rationalize the gaps in the and then the whole thing just falls apart. But because it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I always think about when you sort of get to that age when you're like, wait a second, hold on. So he has to be man for it to be a sacrifice, but he's also the son of God. So what is he, like a demigod? Is he like Hercules? How does this work? And then the whole thing falls apart. Anyway.
Yeah.
Luis, where do you guys stand on lying to your kids about Santa Claus? I genuinely don't know where I would fall on that, because I'm like, it provided so much kind of joy and excitement in the years when I believed it. It was I still have such vivid, precious memories of my brothers and I.
So did Christianity, though. But then I realized it was fake.
Yeah, is it worth it? I don't know. It's just like as an adult, I feel like the world is so fucking joyless that I feel equally guilty denying something that I know can bring joy, if only temporarily. But yeah, Luis, where do you guys kind of fall on that?
Yeah, no, I think the world will break your heart in so many different ways that you want to sustain the innocence for as long as you possibly can. I think that's the appropriate time to be innocent, right? Not like when you're an adult and you trust that the cops are really there to help you. That at that point you don't want to be innocent. At this point, so I rather have my kid indulge in believing in fantasies like Santa Claus, the fairy tooth godmother, and so forth, than grow up to be an adult and still entertain some of these like ideological delusions that are very dangerous and potent. So yeah. That said, though, my kid did start telling kids at school recently that the fairy godmother doesn't exist, and it kind of created like a scandal. She wants to be a paleontologist, so she's into science, so she's already debunking some of these myths. But I don't want to be the person, though, that if she asks me, is this real? Like, I don't want to set up a precedent for lying to her.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I think sorry to be so, morose about it in terms of the world is gonna shatter, break your heart.
Hey man, look at the panel we got here. Where do you think you are?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I see a lot of parallels actually in sort of the journey from realizing Santa's not real to people realizing that police don't protect them and that the U.S. military is not a human rights organization. Like it's there's a process of kind of coping that is not totally dissimilar. But yeah, because I would be sort of curious. I suppose that's an empirical question you could study. Like, is there a correlation between like promoting credulity at a young age with respect to Santa Claus or even religion? Although I don't want to be too, Sam Heresy about that. I know that has its own cultural sort of significance, context dependent, but like, and people's belief in these other kinds of mythologies. Probably not. I don't know.
No, I think coming into consciousness, whatever that consciousness may be, right, it is a painful process. Like people sometimes I feel like underestimate like what that actually means, like in real practical like terms. Like if you grow up in a community where everyone around you is affirming a particular belief, worldview. And then you become alienated from that worldview and you feel like you're alone and you're an outcast. Like that's a painful experience, right?
Yeah.
Which is why the importance of building community and infrastructures for people to come together, like the
Right.
idea of the commons as like our communion, right? Like I feel like in terms of religion, that's a social function that it serves, right? Like you go into, my family grew up Catholic, so you go to confession and you're like, you get to unbosom all these hurts that you have and someone listens to that, right? So when you become an outcast and you no longer believe in that, like, where's your community, right? And it can be distorted in really dangerous ways. Like on the left, sometimes, like it has found really dangerous expressions in terms of like cultish behavior and so forth. But
Right.
healthy, productive communities, are really important, especially when people are grappling with those big questions.
I think about that a lot. I think about the sort of secular analogs to religion a lot, in the sort of dwindling of unions and the dwindling of the civic spaces, and the ways in which, if you go to various suburbs and exurbs and even maybe small towns, the way that the mega church, it functions as a social hub. I mean, in the failure of the quote unquote left to sort of provide those alternatives, institutional in many ways, right? Just an issue of pure funding and the way that laws have broken the unions is something that I know that, Max, you think a lot about, and you think a lot about. I don't know, it's because people do need some sense of like something bigger than themselves, some kind of moral charge. And this is why I've never found the kind of mocking of religion as such to be that interesting. You know what I mean? It's the classic kind of decontextualized Marx pull quote about opioid of the masses. If you read the whole quote, he's actually sort of saying religion serves a social function that's actually good. It's the sigh of the oppressed. It sort of ameliorates suffering, and then he sort of calls upon the left to do that in material terms, not so much as a kind of religion as this abstract moral failing on the part of people. So I don't know. I think that's something I think a lot about. I don't even have an answer for it, largely because I'm just a media critic. I don't have any theoretical answers, but I do struggle with it a lot. I mean,
you just gave one, Adam. You just gave one. Right. Like you're talking Feuerbach here, like in terms of a deeper humanism, right? Like
because we just did a show with Dave Ziver talking about football and like sports in general. And so in so many ways, they are one of the few secular social kind of civic religions we have, for better or for worse, in a lot of communities. And I don't know. It's an interesting conversation about how do you build those spaces when they've been gutted, and community and rec centers are gutted. I mean, look at Chicago. Like they closed down dozens of community rec centers.
Well, if I could put, because I think that you're right. I do think about this quite a bit, and I do occasionally find some solace in how actually like kind of close we do get to what we ultimately want to have, if we can only, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, right? But like, the kind of I don't know, emo antagonistic sort of take of the Marx quote about religion being the opiate of the masses is like, you kind of take an extremist sort of viewpoint there, was like, well, so then we need to kind of like lift the veil of religion and every kind of function, existential, social, cultural function that it serves, like off of humanity, then we will actually be liberated enough to achieve our full potential that religion keeps us from, yada, yada, yada. But as you and Luis are saying, it's like, no, in fact, like there are deeply human yearnings that are met by religion, in the same way that like a lot of the kind of shitty capitalist kind of culture that we are, drenched in does speak to, I think, deeply human and in a lot of ways deeply good kind of qualities that we have. It just like twists those and finds ways to make money off of it. So like, I suppose my example that I always give is like, I grew up in Orange County, right? Orange County is like, about as commercialized of an environment as you could possibly imagine. Like every corner, there's a different mini mall, there's a different complex with like a new Target, or there's a promenade, and or there's a big ass mall, right? And those become the social spaces. Like that's where you go to hang out when you're in high
Yeah.
school. That's where you go to, like, when Christmas comes around, that's where you go to really kind of get in the mood, right? Because it's got all the decorations.
Yeah,
I don't care how commercialized it is. Like that's what I associate with that feeling that I still treasure so much, even if it was like it took place in this kind of hyper commercialized sort of environment. And I remember kind of having this debate with my friends in England when I was there for a spell, because they were like, oh no, Christmas is like old, English people like singing carols in the countryside.
yeah.
And
They
like,
they have a in London. They have a very like I don't want to say non-commercial because there's still commercial elements, but it's like the cities themselves sort of take over squares. And
yeah,
you're not going to the mall, right?
yeah. And so like there was always kind of a back and forth about like which one was more, genuine, or which one was like, I don't know, more worthwhile. And I was like, well, in a way, like the things that's making us defend our respective experiences so fiercely is coming from the same place. They just attached on to like different settings that we grew up in.
That's the ultimate question of the angsty teen who grows up in the suburbs, which is like, as bleak and as car driven and as consumerist as the suburbs may be, and one sort of lashes out at that from a young age, can that in and of itself still be a culture? And is that culture worth preserving as such, or if one has sort of a romantic associations with that, even though the suburbs of course are defined by white flight, they're defined by the sort of preservation of whiteness as a political concept. Like, can you have, because I remember when they brought back the Wonder Years on ABC, and they were interviewing one of the original creators, and he always described that show as a love letter to the suburbs, which we could dissect in about 50 different ways. And you watch the show, and it is like the racial unrest, quote unquote, the civil rights movement, the Black Panthers, the Vietnam War are like largely incidental to the show, for better or for worse. And he sort of wanted to remove all that and make a kind of like romantic, creative artifact of a certain time in a certain place in the suburbs. And I always thought that was sort of interesting and worth dissecting. But can you divorce the romantic associations with the shitty politics of it? I mean, probably not, to be honest.
Probably not, but I mean, again, I guess the hopeful place that I started out from was like kind of hooking into what Luis was saying, right? Is like, and also what you were saying as well, Adam, is that it doesn't mean that we have to necessarily like just bulldoze all of that to find some sort of more genuine feeling at the center of it. Like what we need are better versions. What we need are
Yes.
things that people can attach to collectively and build sort of tradition out of, that serves that same sort of function, right? And so like, I don't know, like
a lot of local, I know a ton of people who like were politically on the fence or agnostic, and they went and they joined, DSA or another socialist organization, or they joined, activist groups or Black Lives Matter, and that gave them a sense of socialization and importance. Obviously, you and I would say that that's much better than, joining a mega church or a vigilante group that patrols the neighborhood. We wouldn't want that. So I think it can and it should. Otherwise, it has no hope of succeeding. It has to serve a social function. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
But then again, you also don't want a cool kids club either, because that becomes its own problem. But go ahead. Sorry, Luis.
No, I was going to add to that point that you just mentioned, right? Like in terms of if the left doesn't, I think Walter Benjamin has this quote that like the expression of fascism is like in many ways a confirmation or verification of a disorganized left, right? Because people don't find a political home, right, for themselves. So they turn to vigilante groups, they turn to conspiracy theories. Like you see, in the news, there have been these stories about, I mean, it's still a marginal number of people that have opted to just quit their jobs and get vaccinated, right? Like, I don't want to it's a very small number, but that they have still been persuaded by these ideas. And that speaks to a breakdown of the left, right? As much as DSA has grown, like the majority of people in this country are not going, that's not where they're finding community, right? It's not in DSA. And the barrier to entry sometimes for left spaces is so high that it's hard to replicate. So I've been reading, I Got the Light of Freedom, about the Mississippi like organizing that happened in the 60s and how easy it was to start like a citizenship school where people didn't even know like where that idea originated. It was like, oh, we just started having classes and talking. And I sometimes like wish that for left spaces or just for a transformative politics, right, that people could just pick something up and just start it, right? Like that there wasn't such a heavy need for infrastructure to just get people together talking to one another, because that's ultimately how transformation happens. Like not necessarily to make it like individual one-on-one, but in a collective space where people are just in community. Like before joining here, I was working with a labor note supporter, Magali Licoli from Venceremos, a poultry organizing project based out of Arkansas. And we brought together about 30 worker centers across the country to talk about organizing shop floor fights. And there were these domestic workers on there from New Jersey that we're going on strike tomorrow. We need to get paid $20 an hour and we're gonna withdraw our labor. And until they accept that the wage that our work commands is $20 an hour. And I'm like, and here are other workers, listening to this story about how these workers are taking action to demand more. And it's like those kinds of experiences multiplied by millions are what lead to transformative change, right? Because we have to overcome that fear. And the only way that we overcome that fear is by being in community with one another and hearing from people that are actually fighting the boss and winning. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I think the last point I'll make is that, in the 60s, people asked themselves, like, how come you had like a Bob Dylan in the US and you had a Chico Buarque in Brazil? And Raymond Williams came up with this concept of the structure of feeling, that these ideas. So when I think about Striketober, right, even though I don't want to oversell it because there are not that many workers technically, like, they haven't surpassed the number of 2018 and 2019. There is this spirit in the air of worker militancy, right? This idea that we got a rough deal and we demand more, we deserve more, and we're going to come and get it. And I hope that spirit of militancy spreads, right? It's not like one institution, it's multiple people just feeling that, right? And going back to plagues in the Renaissance, after a plague, there's usually some kind of rebellion. So I hope this is true to form in terms of previous historical precedents.
Yeah. I mean, also a lot of it's just the massive reduction of unionism and frankly, the fall of the Soviet Union, which I know gets a little awkward, but when you talk about the antecedents of the civil rights movement, especially in Alabama, I mean, that was largely the Alabama Communist Party, which were, in many ways supported and backed by the Soviet Union. So it's like, the sort of atomization and the lack of unionism, or even the IWW, which of course predates the Soviet Union. I mean, those guys were fucking hardcore. I mean, they never really reached above 150,000, but as far as like, the radical mindset was far more robust, largely because there wasn't any liberal institutions. There was very little reformist institutions to kind of ameliorate the suffering. I mean, it was every single factory was this like Dickensian nightmare, and so the radicalism was more seductive. I mean, I think the sophistication of liberalism, quite frankly, is the biggest difference, in my opinion, from now to like 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I mean, the ways in which the NGO complex co-ops and picks people off and shit, it's just like phenomenally impressive. But that's my own kind of pontificating. Sorry.
No, I mean, this is great, and I can't thank you guys enough for actually taking time to hop on. I don't want to be take liberties with your time, so please let me know, like, if you do need to hop off. And just for folks watching, I wanted to say once again that we're right now joined by the amazing Adam Johnson of Citations Needed. We are joined by the amazing Luis Feliz Leon of Labor Notes. And of course you got me and our great producer here, Jules Taylor. We've been doing this live stream to try to raise money for Jules and his family. So if you just kind of joined us in the middle of that, please check the description here on YouTube. Check our Twitter feeds if you need the information for the GoFundMe for Jules's family. And thank you all so much for watching. And again, thank you to Luis, thank you to Adam, thank you to Brian for joining us earlier, and thank you to everyone who's either watching the live stream now or watching or listening to it after the fact, now that we've posted it for y'all to look at. But I just wanted to make sure that y'all knew where to find Luis's work, where to find Adam's work, where to find the GoFundMe for Jules's family. Now, to pick up on something there really quick though, right? Because you guys got the juices flowing now, right? I'm trying to kind of do a series of like in-depth interviews with, I don't know, I just feel like we all need to really kind of, let me take a step back. I think a lot of us recognize how fucked everything is, right? But if you spend so long stewing in that, you really start to kind of like cave in on yourself, and it does feel like even if you are doing important work day in and day out, it doesn't feel like you're moving anywhere. And I think that in many ways is by design. And so I'm trying to kind of do these interviews at The Real News with folks who are really trying to kind of show a path forward, right? And so I say this because Luis, you mentioned something that reminded me of the latest one of these that I did, which was with the great Robin D.G. Kelly, and he put it like very succinctly. He was like in the face of apocalypse, we need to find creative ways to be together, right? And like that's been like rattling around in my brain because it doesn't sound good enough, right? I mean, like that's not. You look at the enormity of the problems that we're facing, it's like, well, finding ways to be together doesn't sound like enough. But I think what he is saying, what a lot of the Black communists that Robin writes about, that Adam referenced a second ago, right, that was an integral part of the philosophy. It's kind of like a rolling downhill philosophy, right? It's like if you first start to train people and build up those muscles of learning how to be together, whether that be kind of like, if you're involved in a strike, that experience doesn't leave you, right? Because you remember what it's like to be on the line with people who are going to the mat for you, having community support, people, someone just standing with you at 3 a.m. in the fucking morning, like that sticks with you. That and then you start to realize why that type of experience of being together in that way, that isn't like monetized, that isn't commercialized, but is really wrought from solidarity and is the kind of foundation for any semblance of community. How you start to realize how little we actually have of that in our world, and how that absence is what makes the enormity of the world being so fucked seem so impossible to fix, right? Is like, does that make sense, right? That even just like getting from point A to point B seems impossible, and so we're looking at point Z and trying to think about like, the massive sort of effort it would take. And I think what Robin is really kind of saying is like, you build that momentum the more that you try to find one another from under the crust of capitalist alienation that keeps us from associating in those ways, that keeps us from having each other's back, that keeps us from knowing our neighbors enough to actually have, I don't know, tenants meetings, right, in our buildings, right? Stuff like that. So I don't know. That was kind of where my mind went and listening to you guys talk.
No, I mean, that definitely resonates. I mean, I read this line a few months ago, and it goes something like this: solidarity must be experienced to be believed. So the experience of a strike in terms of bringing hundreds of people together, right? The kind of transformation that happens there is the way to build those solidarities that ultimately can build up to a transformative force to change society for the better, right? On a new foundation that is based on mutual recognition and, our mutual well-being. I don't think that happens abstractly, right? Like by reading, as much as I love writing, I think sometimes journalists overstate the impact of our work, including myself. It doesn't, it's the experience that people have of, just being on the line with other people that are putting everything out there and taking real risks, right? Like, I mean, overcoming fear to go on strike, like that's a big step, and sometimes we underestimate that. But that, I think, it doesn't sound like the sexiest answer when we talk about the apocalypse, right? That we tell people, yeah, let's come together. But in labor notes trainings, that's what we constantly hear from people. It's like, this is the first time that I've had this experience of coming together. When can we talk more? And sometimes unions, right? Like, I mean, labor notes, we support the labor movement, but it's not from a position of being uncritical. There's need for reform, as we see with the one member, one vote campaign with the UAW. We see that the Teamsters are also coming, are going for an election. So we believe in internal democracy within unions so that members can actually have control over the direction of their unions. So I think that's essential. So I totally agree and would echo that sentiment. Solidarity must be experienced in order to be believed. And the film Pride is a perfect example of that. I love that film, and some of my colleagues at Labor Notes love it too. It's about miners who, are on strike, and it's sometimes on the left right now, you have to check off some boxes before you can even be allowed in the room. I want people to come into the room because we all carry, Marx has this line about the muck of the ages, right? That we all have been, like, you just put through the dirt, and we have all these things that cling to us. And the only way that shit comes off of us is when we get together and we're in that room and we're grappling and struggling with one another. And that muck, loses its hold on us. But we are all ideologically formed in those ways. So yeah.
Fucking A, man.
Yeah, I mean, I have a sort of a more top-down belief that I'm a little bit, it's a little bit maybe cart before the horse. But I broadly think that that one of the major problems the quote-unquote left faces that I think about all the time is that there are institutional reasons why this is, but the complete lack of pop culture products, which I know, Max, we've talked about offline. I could probably name you 5 movies that are where the main drive is it's either a pro-union or a pro-labor movie. I mean, literally 5. I mean, I can, on one hand, you could probably count maybe 6 or 7 if you go into foreign films. But I mean, just in terms of like things that Joe Blow would see in the United States. And, so there are literally more Spider-Man movies than there are pro-labor movies. And unfortunately in our culture, I believe whereas at the same time we are constantly fed every day television, movies, nonstop, the ideology of hyper-individualism and libertarianism. And those cultural forces, I just think can be tweaked a little bit to effect. And I think that to the extent to which there is any left of any access to the mechanisms to do that, which again, I know is based on a contradiction, even though Hollywood's very unionized, it doesn't matter. The unions aren't the ones writing the check at the end of the day, right? They're not the ones saying green lighting this or green lighting that. I think quite frankly, like the sort of purging of pinkos and reds from Hollywood in the 50s and 60s and the sort of and what that kind of born from that, and the lack of any kind of for want of a better term, left-wing propaganda makes it more difficult. And I do think that that's not a place that I think anyone should see ground. And to the extent to which one can kind of work within that system or try to sneak in those messages, I think that can be useful, because unfortunately, I just think like so many people in this country, because of the ideological reproduction from film and television, and of course you have things like nightly news and all that other stuff, the kind of 7-year-old kid collects cans to send for his mom's cancer bullshit we get every day on local news, does that as well. But I mean, to me, I think that would be something that would be worth spending attention on. And I know it sounds silly because these are bourgeois institutions by definition, but like, bourgeois institutions historically have you're able to sort of corrupt those, or for want of a better term, colonize those in very minor ways. And that's sort of my general interpretation. Because if you when you do media criticism for a living, you sort of realize that like I read 1,000 New York Times editorials, and I just think that those probably matter about as much as one episode of CBS's Blue Bloods. Like, and that's like bleak and sad, but it's just like, that's just where people ingest ideology. And I think the fact that people think they're not ingesting ideology is what makes it so effective. Whereas I think our guard is up more when we are reading editorials or when we're watching the news. And that's, a little bit depressing, because again, 90% of what I do is criticize the news, but I actually think the news is only one minor player in the broader ideological reproduction. With the exception of the movie Newsies, which is like outright communist propaganda. I have no idea how that movie got made. I rewatched that movie for the first time in a while. I'm like, this is like outright communist propaganda. I have no idea how Disney made this movie. I mean, it is like a shock. It somehow got through the cracks. I don't know how.
Yeah, that one slipped past the goalie, but I'm so glad that it did.
The way they get around it is at the end, the big hero is Teddy Roosevelt, and I'm like, okay, well, they had to sort of like latch that on at the end as a kind of as a sort of bourgeois Deus Ex Machina. But anyway.
Well, and it makes me think, I guess for folks listening and watching, we're super excited about an episode that we've been working on for a couple months, actually. But it is with Adam's wife, the great Sarah Lazard, the brilliant writer and editor at In These Times, who co-authored, a novel with her late father called Testimony. That is an exceedingly good novel, right? And it's exceedingly gripping. And so for folks watching and listening, what you're going to get very, very soon is an episode where we did some dramatic readings. And also we had and our boy Adam and Sarah were part of that. The great Mel Bird joined us for that. So we're super excited about it. But this is what we talked about in the conversation that Sarah and I had, was just like how meaningful it is to have like good, compelling stories that touch and tickle those things that you read literature for, right? To like better understand your place in the world, to find out better ways to dream, right? And to think about, futures worth living in, to expand your imagination and see outside of your own head. That's what I've always gone to literature for. And like, when you go to like Soviet realism, it falls a little flat because it doesn't feel convincing. Maybe the story's not very compelling, but that really just highlights why cultural products, quote unquote, like Sarah's novel, are so important, right? Because if they can, attract you in the same sort of way that other pop culture products do, but lead your imagination towards different ends and lead your sympathies towards different types of characters and different human qualities, that does, to Adam's point, have a huge impact. Because I mean, shit, so much of our pop culture and I guess, not even just pop culture, but a lot of our literature, it does teach us ultimately to be the kind of people that fit well into the capitalist system that we have, by which I mean a lot of these cultural products teach us how to be alone together, right? I think that's that big gap that we're talking about here, right? Where we don't have as many spaces like what Luis described, where we can be actually ourselves together, where we can actually become more than what we are now because of the ways that we interact with other people, as opposed to just being people in our little cars or our little apartments, people watching our specific Netflix feeds and dreaming about our own lives, but really only as far as kind of like our individual paths go.
Well, Max, one thing you've been sort of, y'all have been alluding to that I'm actually sort of to get your thoughts on, and then I have to run, but I want to get your thoughts on it, which is you've sort of teased this idea of being together, and I'm sort of curious how y'all view the importance of physical gathering versus digital gathering. I know this is like something the left talks about a lot, but I want to get y'all's thoughts on it, because I'm sort of torn myself, and I know that there are considerations about that. We don't want to. I understand that there's a lot of ableism in dismissing digital activism, and I spend obviously 18 hours a day on Twitter, so I'm not one to talk either. But I'm sort of curious to hear y'all talk about the importance of physically getting together, and how the pandemic, because the right doesn't give a shit about that, right? The right-wing vigilantes, the Chesa Bodine recall group, the fucking anti-vax guys, those guys are getting together, right? They're not stopping that. The churches are getting together. They're not stopping that. So I'm curious what y'all think about the importance of that and how you navigate that while not, being COVID denialists.
So since I just went on a long tear, I wanted to ask if Luis or Jules have any thoughts on that. Otherwise, I'll hop in.
Luis, you got anything?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is important. I do think that in my experience, in terms of organizing, I feel like sometimes people oversell like the impact of online efforts, and when it comes down to it, the most important conversation that happens in an organizing campaign is between the co-workers at the same shop, right? So we think about Amazon, it's workers in that same warehouse in that shift talking to one another. It's important that, let's say, President Biden issues a tweet or releases a statement and is shared broadly on Twitter, and it kind of gives some official stamp of approval, right? Like that helps and can move some workers maybe. But the most important person that will move a worker is the person that you work with, at your shop. And what Amazon understands so well, and that's why the turnover is so high, is that they actively try to mitigate against the ability of workers to form those bonds on the shop floor, right? They choose workers that live far from one another, so they have to drive, so that when they leave work, they're so exhausted and beaten down that they're not going to stop to talk to someone. So I think that because of that.
Wait, hold on. I'm going to back up there. You're saying Amazon specifically make sure that they actually take action. I mean, again, this doesn't surprise me necessarily, but I'm curious. They use whatever sort of secret sauce algorithm or managerial software to make sure people who work physically close to each other don't get off at the same time and don't live next to each other, to avoid like a beer over at Buffalo Wild Wings where they bitch about their boss.
Right. So I'll give you a concrete example. So here in New York City, right, there are delivery stations that Amazon has. They have one in Woodside, which is a predominantly Latino neighborhood. And they have obviously the big fulfillment center in Staten Island. So when you look at where people live, right, they don't live in those very same communities. You have people, and this is something that Amazon workers have picked up on and they've shared, right? I've asked Amazon spokespeople about, especially for the Bessemer campaign, I was like, how were you able to staff up so quickly? Once they flooded the bargaining unit and they hire like about 5,000 people, I was like, how were you able to do that? It's such a quick, turnaround. Like people struggle like hiring, and, part of they didn't answer the question. Like they told me, we use a number of resources online, blah, blah, blah. But I know that in warehouses here, like if you look at where the facilities are and where the workers are coming from, there's a difference in terms of demographics, so that they're not crowding people together, right? And I mean, at Labor Notes, we talk about how the boss keeps us disorganized. And a lot of that goes into how the boss organizes the workspace, like literally. So in terms of Amazon, people are constantly moved from one job to another. So if you're a water spider, as they call it, that gives you mobility in the warehouse, so you could talk to workers. So if they see you're an organizer, they'll move you to become a stower where you're fixed, bolted down. And at RWDSU tried to challenge Amazon on this, right? They didn't win because technically the jobs are so open-ended that you can't prove that they retaliated and demoted the person, right? And it's by design that they have that flexibility. So that's all to say that coming together, having people in the same room is key in terms of building solidarity among people. Like there's no way that muck comes off, when you are in a Zoom meeting. It's just not possible because people are not like, I mean,
we're social creatures, and those physiological responses are not present. Because I think a lot about the sort of old adage that the biggest Marxists in the world are on Wall Street. Like Amazon knows, even if some on the left don't, the power of that beer after work where you complain about your boss. Because I mean, again, I waited tables for 10 years and bartended or waited tables for 7 years, bartended for 3 years, and like even just looking back on the ways in which they would create tension, artificial tension between workers. You have this good section, you have a bad section, and then you would get mad at the person who has the good section, not your manager, is clearly just trying to pit you against each other. So you basically had like a bum fight situation. They do that all the time. The racial divisions, the front of the house, back of the house, are deliberate, right? So it's the sort of the Latino workers are mad at the fucking asshole white guys because they make twice as much as they do, which to be fair, they're not wrong. Versus like the white guys, like, oh, so and so from Guatemala is lazy and blah 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 and doesn't speak. And the ways they artificially pit you against each other is not an accident. It's by design. And I guess Amazon taking that to the next level is to be expected, because they do have so what the scam they do is they say like, oh, we have the highest wages, we pay $15 an hour, but you have extreme precarity and very, very high turnover, and they grind you to a nub. So they can afford to pay the extra $1 an hour. And then they go on and they say, oh, look at us, we're so benevolent, we give these high wages. But what you're saying is that like the high wages are a gimmick to create faster turnaround.
Well, I wouldn't say
So
that
they
the
can-
wages are high. Like I would disagree with that. I think
They argue that they were the first to do the $15 minimum wage or whatever.
Yeah, but that's bullshit. I mean, in terms of the warehousing
yeah.
sector, like, I mean, the wages command more. I mean, I used to work as a forklift operator at Target, and I mean, some of these jobs, they like, that's it's just something that we have to look at the local conditions. That's actually one thing that Amazon does, is that it drives down standards. So they come into a place, they drive down wages. That's why the Teamsters, are taking them on, because if like they're basically the Teamsters have elevated, and other unions, that's the fight, right? Let's raise standards for everybody. Even workers that are not in a union, where there's a union, the standards go up.
Yep.
Amazon has the opposite effect. Let's bring them down, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, but I know, Jules, you wanted to say something, so I don't want to.
No, it's all good. I have a whole thing to string together, and I'm hoping that I do it well enough to communicate kind of the intersections of all these different points. But like going back to, I mean, the need for physical socialization, being in the room with someone. I think that, I mean, I'm reminded of like something Todd May said in his book, A Decent Life, where he had like these 12 rules at the end or something, and not like a Jordan Peterson thing, but like, it's Todd May. And he said something like, when you get mad at your children, make sure and like scold them, looking them in the face. And when you do that, you're not going to react with anger as quickly as you might if you were detached from that, is sort of the point. Like even in talking to people online, obviously there's a detachment from the acknowledgement of the humanity on the other side of a keyboard, and obviously that's made social media just this algorithmic sort of boiling point in our society, which is awful, right?
I feel attacked, but go ahead.
Well, we're all guilty of it, man. I have several.
I dunk on people for a living, buddy. You better watch it.
Well, I appreciate when you dunk on people, though, which is part of the.
Well, the general rule is you want to try to punch up. That way
right.
you don't feel like an asshole. And then there's those edge cases where you're like, is this person not really?
Right.
Or am I just kind of going for a cheap dunk?
But I also like, I think that part of the greater project of working people, the podcast, is to thread together this shared sense of humanity, the shared sense of like, we're all workers, the shared sense of like, maybe at times it's a common enemy, and maybe at times it's common grievances, but overall it is within, obviously, the spectrum of being part of the working class. And so in threading together that community, there are certain obstacles, right? And part of what we're fighting against is convincing that person or listener or what have you that they actually are part of that working class. I mean, Max, you've said it before, that kind of one of the great American tragedies is like an entire class of workers who like at times don't want to even admit to themselves that they are the working class, that we've been so ideologically programmed. And this goes way back in the conversation to where we're talking about like civic religion, when we're talking about how, I mean, for me, it comes down to like, people were social creatures, and when I talk to like ex-evangelicals, what they miss is not the religion or anything like that, it's the community. So that being a part of what humans ultimately need, socialization with each other and community, it seems like when you have a society where the points of community are stripped and everything's overly commodified, and so we lose these commons, um, and the online commons is not necessarily like doing the same thing that an in-person commons would provide. um, I think that people naturally, like I said, like we'd rather them join the DSA than a mega church. But who's to say that they even find community within either of those? Maybe they just opt into ultra like patriotism, because that's a shared sense of community, that they have lots of people that like, that think the United States is the number one country in the world, and that we are a force for good in the world. And so so part of the obstacle of working people and trying to convince people that that they are part of the working class, or at least the shared sense of community. I think that the reason why that obstacle is so difficult to overcome is on the one level, it's ideological programming from a small age, sure. But on the other side, it really is a civic religion. You look at the sacred documents of the Declaration of Independence. You look at the larger than life monuments that are in our capital. This has taken on, I mean, even going back into history with like with the parallels of like the death of Abraham Lincoln to Jesus Christ, Lincoln dying on Good Friday, the kind of national funeral that happened after that, and the way the United States, the secular religion thing, the civic religion thing, I think in terms of monuments and the documents and everything, this really got a huge shot in the arm when the United States became a more solidified country after the Civil War by taking on the burdens of Civil War death and all of that. So I don't know if I've done a good enough job tying all this stuff together, but I think that the physical encounters with people, it at a very minimum, it makes it that much more difficult to deny or to not acknowledge the humanity of someone that is has certain things in common with you, right? That suffer from the same things. And so I think to the degree that physical spaces and getting together physically outside of the digital realm, I think that's the left has to use that. So.
I mean, the flip side is, of course, the way the sort of worker and the sort of boss imposed social events and the mudding of middle management and how physically you begin to empathize with them, and then it muddies the class waters deliberately. The way, I mean, Max, you've done this podcast long enough. Y'all done this podcast long enough. Labor Notes, you would know this. Y'all could do a whole YouTube series on like the various ways in which you're psychologically manipulated to empathize with the boss and the landlord and the various sort of, I mean, the humanity goes both ways. And again, in many ways, you can be like, oh, you're the cool manager, I empathize with you. And you sort of feel bad about, maybe I shouldn't strike because it's going to make him look bad. And the various ways those things happen. Again, y'all could definitely do a whole book or YouTube series on the various little ways that your emotional allegiances are tricked. It's sometimes not even necessarily deliberately, just by the virtue of how the system's set up, the way that HR is used to sort of, pathologize worker abuse and even sexual harassment. It's not your boss who's the problem. It's you're not. You need a wellness program. You need to meditate more. I mean, all that shit. So I mean, the tools of manipulation and convincing people that their enemy is not the person who writes their check, but some immigrant or some feminist or some this or that. I mean, that shit's gotten so sophisticated, it's just crippling. I mean, it makes labor organizing, I assume, much harder than it was back in the day when you're, 100 years ago, when your boss literally wore a fucking, monocle and a top hat. And it was like, oh, okay, that's easily identifiable. You can put that in very clear class terms. But anyway, I have to run. Actually, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I'll hop in with like my spiel, but before I do that, because I know you guys got to go. I just wanted to, like, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Adam. Thank you, Luis, for spending so much of your Sunday with us to kind of shoot the shit, have this really great conversation and help us try to get the word out to raise money for Jules and his family. Truly means the world to me.
course.
And I'll let you listen to my like spiel when we post it after the fact, but I didn't want to keep you guys now because I know you got to get going.
All right, y'all. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, man. Appreciate
All
it.
right,
Thank
later.
you.
Thank you, Adam.
Bye.
Thank y'all.
Okay, so by way, I guess, of rounding out, and because that was really great, and you know, Jules and I had like some kind of fun, dopey like prompts to keep the conversation going in case it lagged about Halloween, and I think one of them was, is pumpkin carving ethical? So what's our stance on carving pumpkins, or have horror movies gotten shittier in the past 20 years? So we had those kind of locked and loaded to keep the fun going, keep the conversation going in case, you know, it is a Sunday night, in case folks couldn't join the live stream. But then lo and behold, you know, Brian jumped on, and it was great to see him there. Luis and Adam spent an hour and a half of their Sunday night with us, kind of talking about these really great questions that have really got a lot of thoughts bubbling in my head. So I guess this is really a testament to what we were just kind of talking about, right? You know, there is a huge importance in us finding those ways to be together, however small they are. And I guess this kind of leads into my, like, the rant that I was going to go on, but, and maybe it can be kind of like my final word, and then we can kind of wrap things up here. But I guess in response to everything that you said, Jules, that Adam was saying, that Luis was saying, and kind of starting back with the question that Adam asked, right, is, you know, I've given this analogy on the show before, I believe, you know, where I kind of chide other leftists about how we talk about sports, right? Because, you know, we tend to criticize kind of sports as a very distinct, you know, commercialized profession. We talk about professional sports basically as a commercialized thing that has been thoroughly kind of co-opted by capitalism. And so that makes it kind of gross. You know, we all know that, you know, fucking military planes flying over, and the big song and dance about the national anthem. Like there are a lot of aspects to professional sports that are kind of gross, or that are just so deeply woven into our other nationalistic, capitalistic ideologies that it feels impossible to disentangle sports as such from that. And I don't fully buy that, right? And what I always try to tell people is, I was like, you know, think about it just from like going to play pickup. Like, stop thinking about sports just as a consumer, as someone in the stands, or as someone watching from home in your living room. Think about what sports mean to those who play them, right? Think about how, you know, little in the rest of our lives we actually have those kinds of spaces where, like, I used to love, before I blew out my knee, going to play pickup basketball was probably my favorite thing in the world to do. It's probably the thing I spent more time doing, either shooting around in our hoop back home, playing with my brothers, going to the junior high and playing pickup there. Like, it was a huge part of my life until the knee injury kind of took that away. But there was so much that I got from that I couldn't get in other areas of my life, right? The experience of going to a place, sitting like on the bench or walking up the sideline and talking to people that I may have never seen before, or recognizing people that I played with before. You're like, hey, do you guys got 5? Do you need another? You guys got next? If not, I want to hop in. And so then you're thrust into the situation where, you know, in a very short window of time, you are playing basketball with, you know, could be 6 other guys, could be 5-on-5, a lot of whom you may not have met before, or may not really know very well outside of that context. But in that limited amount of time, and in that limited amount of space, with those rules in place to keep the game going, you have to figure out ways to work together to achieve a common goal. You have to identify each other's strengths and weaknesses. You have fun with it, right? I mean, like, and you get competitive and you get physical, and there's a sort of camaraderie that can build if things are gelling well, right? If you know, try to assist other people. The point being is that even in such a localized space, like a pickup, like a blacktop court where you play pickup, you engage in that kind of social relationship that I do believe has a really lasting impact on you and makes you feel closer to people who, if you see those people in other contexts, like if you pass them in the aisle at a supermarket, you're just going to blow right past them, right? They're almost like non-entities. That's what I mean by like the whole culture of being alone together, right? If we're walking through the aisles of a grocery store, you know, and the same people who we end up kind of playing 5-on-5 with at a junior high pass us by, they're nothing to us and we're nothing to them. And so the point being is, by way of answering Adam's question, is that I actually think that there are tons of ways that we can and should be and on occasion do kind of work with one another, relate to one another in those kinds of ways that make us that bring out the best in us, that make us kind of relate to each other in ways that aren't prescribed by the kind of hegemonic system that oppresses us. I guess that's where I'm kind of going with it. Is this system, such that it is, has these kind of prescribed paths for us. It has these kind of prescribed ways of interacting with one another that are the sort of default, right? It's the easiest to follow that path because that's where everything sort of points, right? You know, it's much harder to try to kind of work against that, you know, and to feel like, well, the other people in my apartment building aren't just kind of like these little walled off, like, you know, groups of people or individuals in their own private spheres. Like, we can actually all meet together, and I don't know, we could have a like an apartment coffee hour. We could like have a thing where, you know, we help elderly neighbors out with their laundry, right? I mean, we just take that step to do what we are conditioned not to do if we just follow the preset, prescribed sort of paths that lead us to always being alone together in the world, but not together in any sort of non-capitalist way, right? And that kind of goes to the other part of the question about, you know, like, yeah, that doesn't mean everyone should go play pickup basketball. I guess the other thing that we're constantly harping about on this show, right, is that it's a big fucking country, right? And it's an even bigger world. Not every solution is going to work for everybody. That doesn't mean that like each one doesn't have value, right? And so, yes, for all the necessary kind of critiques about prescribing, like, you know, the pickup basketball, meet in person, do that kind of thing together, that's not going to work for everybody. It can work for a lot of people who should probably do it, right? But it's not the only one. And in fact, we need to do a whole lot of these activities. We need to find a whole bunch of different ways to be together and to work together. There's not one silver bullet. And, you know, I think that there are great examples of how people, again, bucked that prescribed path that capitalism and kind of capitalist culture and the social relations that we feel are most natural within that system. That's what I mean by going down those prescribed paths. Mm-hmm. There's so many ways that exists in the digital realm that we can, you know, subvert as well. And I think that, you know, the social media is a perfect kind of example of what I'm talking about. Like, it's a perfect way for us to be alone together, because you are your avatar, right? You are the kind of name that you put on the kind of statements that you put out there, on the likes that you put on other people's statements, yada, yada, yada. And we're all in this kind of virtual space together, but we are all these sort of atomized avatars of ourselves. But there are, and we see each other as kind of social competitors for clout, right? You know, Adam was talking about dunking on people, right? There is a very hyper capitalist way that we are taught to relate to one another in the digital realm. I would encourage people to go check out Jody Dean's amazing book, Democracy and Other Neoliberal Fantasies, where she fleshes this out beautifully, where she says, like, the digital world such that it has become has really made us into perfect capitalist subjects who see each other as kind of competitors in this zero-sum Hobbesian nightmare, you know. But there are ways that, again, we can buck that trend. There are ways that we can push against that and build that kind of sense of togetherness and that kind of solidarity that Luis was mentioning, that really is the soil from which different ways of being, different ways of imagining kind of like how we can get out of this fucking hell start to sprout. There are ways that, you know, have been accessible to more people that have happened online that have still done that. I think about the whisper networks that essentially made possible the Me Too movement by people finding one another when in their physical workspaces they may have felt marginalized and isolated, and they may have felt the kind of all-seeing eye of their shithead male bosses on them at all times, to the point where actually going online, finding other people who had experienced this in sort of secret, creating these kinds of like big spreadsheets where people were kind of listing, you know, assholes who were abusive and serial harassers. They were being validated by other people, affirming that they had the same experience or that they had witnessed those same things. Again, this is a kind of sociality that came together because people came together, right? You know, because they did not just stick to those prescribed paths that are set for them in their work lives and in the kind of social arrangements that are kind of just most obvious and available to us. You have to do some work to find one another, and when you do, you can actually build things. You can, whether that be a spreadsheet of serial harassers, and in the process a sense of solidarity that gives you the collective courage to take on the very industry that has your career in its hands like a little bird, right? I mean, the same thing is true for a lot of other organizing. Like I remember talking to the great gig worker and organizer Willie Solis. He talks about this in the book that I have coming out, where I interviewed a lot of workers. Willie was one of them, and he talks about how, you know, the Facebook groups for Shipped shoppers, which is the kind of like delivery service, app-based delivery service that is owned by Target, they had Facebook groups where gig workers like Willie could supposedly go to ask other gig workers if they were having this issue, or basically solve each other's problems. And what Willie said is that it ended up becoming this sort of like fucking panopticon, where everyone was watching each other and everyone was judging each other, and everyone was applying what he describes as this kind of toxic positivity, where like if you were having an issue, it was because you weren't working hard enough, right? You weren't buying into the message, and it sounds very cult-like. And so, you know, that's an example again of like those, what Adam said, like that this kind of cuts both ways, right? So those spaces on their own are not going to do it. And so this actually forced people like Willie to start reaching out to other ship shoppers individually. And the amazing story that Willie told me is that he ended up talking to like 600 ship shoppers in the span of like 2 weeks. And just the stories that people were sharing because someone had taken that step to actually ask, right? Because that's not the step that that's not the prescribed path. You know, you are not encouraged to do that. You were actually encouraged to only kind of focus on the orders that come through your app. You're focused on protecting your ratings, right? And you only really relate to other shoppers when you're kind of just passing them by, or at most in these sort of Target approved Facebook groups. But if you actually start kind of being a bit of a fugitive, right? If you start pushing against those sort of preset paths, if you start burrowing holes through those walls, you may end up finding other people who feel exactly like you do. And when you find one another, and when you start talking in those sorts of terms, I think that's what we were kind of getting at, is like, you know, there's no telling where it could go. The point being is that you, like Louis said, you have to see it and experience it to believe it, right? We're not blowing smoke up people's asses. There really is something that is unlocked in your brain and in your heart and in your workplace when workers start talking to one another about their paychecks or about how they're being mistreated, because a lot of times we feel like we're the only ones going through that. Then we find out that shit, 5 other coworkers are going through that. Maybe we should talk about this. That experience it catalyzes things and it creates possibilities that kind of ripple out in ways that we can't quite understand or anticipate. So this is a very long, like, ranty way of answering kind of Adam's essential question. But I think, like, again, basic points are we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. There are a lot of different ways to do this, that some that are more accessible than others. But again, it's a big fucking country. No one option has to serve all people. We just have to kind of use as many tools as we possibly can, in the best context, and make them best work in the context that they do, to be effective and to bring people together so that they can sort of achieve those kinds of ends. For folks on a picket line in Omaha, that may be kind of showing up and bringing pizza and physically being there and talking to workers who are on that picket line, right? For folks who want to engage in a boycott, like there are other ways that you can do that, both in person or online. For folks who want to, again, use these sorts of alternative ways of talking to one another and compiling their collective knowledge, whether you be a ship shopper, or like Willie, or whether you be like a woman in Hollywood, who is finding out that the person you work for is a rampant fucking abuser, right? There are a lot of ways to do this. The main point being is that as workers and as citizens in a capitalist society that trains us to dream capitalist dreams, right, so that we can achieve fulfillment in capitalist terms, those terms are always going to lead us to a place where we are ultimately alone, right? And where we ultimately, whatever success we may have, will not challenge the arrangement of the system that provides that success, right? So that is where those preset paths go, to all of us being kind of these individual points lost in an expansive sky up above us, that are never kind of connected in any sort of constellation of togetherness, belonging, and solidarity, right? There you go. That's I guess my kind of long-winded answer is that is where the preset paths lead us. If we want to actually kind of change the very system that sets those paths, we have to first start to kind of like go against the grain and go different places, wander off different paths, find each other in different spaces, talk to each other in different contexts about different things besides what do you do for a living, right? Like, or stuff like that. There are so many ways that we in fact can be together that we don't even think about, because we are just so locked into the basic presets of the system that we currently live in. So, Jules, do you have anything to do with that before I kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, I think you said quite a bit there, and I think it all, I'd like to respond to it by kind of circling back and to where we started this entire conversation around like the concept of like monetizing your passion, and I think that you said it best when you said that, if we have capitalist dreams, we will end up being fulfilled in capitalist sort of approved methods, and so what I mean by there's always like this tension within monetizing your passion, that you're passionate about something, but you're going to do something else so that way you can fund this, or you're going to take this and then really focus on that and really try to monetize that by doing that. And this tension of whether your passion is suitable for capitalizing in a capitalist world inevitably influences your passions, or it influences you to do things that you are less than passionate about within the course of trying to, and it's all this really this cyclical sort of thing that I think we all know on one level or another. I mean, I think when we were talking about the professional wrestlers, I mean, I thought to myself, like as a musician, as a person who's tried to make his living through performing music or working on music or other content, like if I had a kid and they were like, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to be really passionate about being a professional wrestler," I might sound to them like my parents probably sounded to me when I said, "Hey, I'm going to go try and be a musician." you know, and I'd be like, well, you know, why don't you try something like, you know, have a backup plan like welding or something, you know? So all that to being said, there is, it's crucially important that we deviate from the past where everything points, you know, because, and I think that, you know, Adam was right, and it is relevant to the point of us needing to deviate into less charted or uncharted paths to achieve non-capitalist sanctioned fulfillment. In that, you know, I think that like the moment your brain starts to turn on with like at a young age of being cynical around Santa Claus or something is the moment you can, that is the seed that kind of germinates into so many things, including the willingness to look for paths that are not, you know, pre-prescribed. And I think that there have been, you know, philosophers that have tried to, you know, like Deleuze and Guattari, who are like, hey, let's get out of this Oedipus trap. Let's get psychoanalysis out of this Freudian ensnarement where everything is interpreted through this lens, and let's take a broader creative approach that's more affirming in that there are so many other possibilities out there. Why are we ensnared by this? And likewise, why are our dreams ensnared by capitalism in such a way that they, like your conversation with Robin D.G. Kelly about how like the dreams this world gives us, as you said, are just like not good enough, and that we need to have better dreams in order to have better, you know, aspirations of what is possible. And so yeah, so I mean, wrapping all that together, you know, I don't really know what to say to wrap that all together, other than I think that we made a complete circle back to the beginning of the conversation somehow. And you know, it was amazing having Adam here and hearing from Luis and Brian. I mean, I thought it was I mean, we didn't know what kind of conversation it was going to be. But when people started talking about civic religion, I was like, ooh, Spidey, you know, senses going up, man. You know,
So Jules perk right up.
yeah. And I mean, I was always, you know, really curious to hear what Adam and Luis and you had to say, because like, you know, as you probably know, we've talked about a lot of civic religion on No Easy Answers. And and part of me, I mean, it's, I don't know, man, what does me a lot of good and provides a lot of affirmation is like knowing that I've had these thoughts, and then knowing that other people have shared in these thoughts. And so when I find something that's really intriguing, like the thought of, I mean, I did what was it? Adam mentioned also about after a plague, kind of a rebellion happens, you know, or maybe that was Luis. I can't remember who said it. But you know, like it goes back to understanding, like I mean, Barbara Tuchman's book about the calamities in 14th century Europe is an incredible book about the ways the social fabric shifts as a result of these sort of mass tragedies, you know, mass death. And so it may seem kind of incommensurate to like compare the Civil War with that, but I did a whole episode kind of seeing how the social fabric changes after something like the Civil War, with the amount of casualties we had then, and what happens when, you know, half of Europe dies of the Black Plague, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's really important that we reach out to each other, physical space or over online, just as like, you know, if you're having a thought, then somebody else is having that thought. And when those two people who are having those thoughts get to discuss that, that leads to other thoughts that are outside of your pre-prescribed modes. Is you're not, nothing in this world is kind of, you know, pushing you within the realm of capitalism to talk to that person, you know, to share those ideas. And that's not how we're trained. And so it is, you know, it's really important just to say, on one level, it's like saying hello to a person at a toll booth. You may not ever see that person again, but it is like worthwhile to say hello, how are you, or have a nice day, or something to that end, because it just it like affirms this this linking that we have of a shared common humanity. And that sharing is maybe the you know, if anything, online, right? I mean, I feel like part of the reason why we can even have these discussions about increasing the social welfare system is like people got online and realized, hey, in Italy, they got like double salary in December, and they got these really nice things over in Italy. And why don't we have those here? And then these questions, but all because we are connected, and those things don't happen without connection. And so I guess that's what I'd have to say about that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm glad that we ended up there, because that's kind of where I was gonna kind of offer a final thought, right, about to really kind of make concrete our kind of philosophical opining about going against the grain of what capitalist society trains us to do. I guess, like, you made the perfect point, right? Is that, like, that doesn't, and this is where I mentioned earlier when we were talking to Luis and Adam, is I was like, I think the thing that makes me hopeful is that it's not as far away as we think it is, right? It's not as impossible to imagine as we may feel it is. It could be just like a hair's width away from what we currently do, but the difference could open up a universe of possibilities. And that is really, for as highfalutin as that may sound, that is ultimately, like, the goal of this show, to play some small part, using the tools that we have to essentially get people to see one another differently than they do in capitalist society, right? To not just kind of see the person, the Instacart shopper or ship shopper who just drops your bags off at your door, and you leave like a little rating, and you may wave to them, and that's maybe it. That's how the kind of system that is arranged wants you to see one another as customer and worker, and that's the end of their kind of relationship. But if you hear kind of, hopefully, the stories that we try to share on the show, and we're by no means the only ones doing it, that's what also makes me hopeful, is that there are a lot of people out there who are trying to get others to listen to one another differently, and to listen to the people who we normally don't listen to, and talk about themselves in ways we don't normally kind of think about or ask them to talk about themselves. But if we start to do that, then, like you said, you start to see, like, that actually people aren't as far away from you as you feel on a day-to-day basis. It may feel like such an impossible task to ask someone about where they grew up, right? Even if they live next door to you, even if they work on the same shop floor as you. But once you kind of start making those connections, you see each other in a different way. You sympathize with one another in a different way. You realize the things that you have in common. You appreciate and take interest in the things that you don't have in common. You try to understand, more of the world and people's lives, more of the stuff that exists outside of your own head, like I said. So, like, it, for as revolutionary as the thought may be, the practicality of doing differently and being differently and finding each other in ways that go against the grain of those preset sort of like paths that capitalist life sets for us, small steps do matter, right? Small steps open up big possibilities, I guess, is the way that I would put it. And that's what we've ultimately been hoping to do, and however small a part, with this show. That's how I'm renewed by little examples like this, where we have a friend in need whose family needs like money. I put out a call, we can't all be in a space together, but here come friends jumping in, helping us like spread the word. People we may never have met face to face are donating money to this because of that, the goodness of their own hearts, and because of the solidarity that they feel. That, again, is something that, in our day-to-day lives, we may not be compelled to feel. But if we can push against that grain, and we feel that solidarity, and we feel that thankfulness to everyone who's been watching and listening and donating, that gives me, as Robin Kelly said, the strength to fight another day. And I think that with that, I would, just say, I had like a good example that I wanted to bring up when Adam was asking about, like forms of culture, right? That are like movies that teach us to dream differently, or shows that have
Right.
a pro-union message. right? So the first thing that came to my mind that I really love and that I kind of wanted to end on is the opening stanza to this song called Helplessness Blues by Fleet Foxes.
Oh wow.
And if you listen to it, I mean, it's a great autumn song, so I would encourage everyone to check it out now. But this is how it starts. It says, I was raised up believing I was somehow unique, like a snowflake distinct among snowflakes, unique in each way you'd conceive. And now, after some thinking, I'd say I rather be a functioning cog in some great machinery serving something beyond me. Right. And like, I remember kind of listening to that over and over again. And I was like, oh man, that's kind of like a process of, again, like dreaming differently. And it made me reflect on like, man, all of the kind of culture that I latched onto as a kid taught me to, again, to feel like that unique snowflake whose like future really only mattered insofar as like the life I could make for myself, not the impact I could have on the world or on other people, right? Anything like that. And so that's what I mean is like, it could even just be that small of a shift to how you dream and what you dream about and what really, you know, you dedicate yourself to in that sense of dreaming, you know, that can really have those rippling effects and open up those huge possibilities. So, okay, that'll be my final word. And I wanted to thank everyone out there for watching this live stream. Thank you for sharing the live stream. Thank you to everyone who has donated to the GoFundMe and shared the GoFundMe with your social networks. If you are watching or listening to this after this live stream is concluded, please remember that the fundraiser is still going. Jules and his family still need that support. So please give what you can, or at the very least, please help us spread the word. It all helps. It all matters. And we cannot thank y'all enough for all your love and your support. Just like we can't thank Jules enough for everything he does for us, for making the show happen, and for all around being a phenomenal human being. So thank you, Jules. Love you, buddy. And for us here at Working People, we are signing off for tonight. Happy spooky season. Happy Striketober, everybody. Solidarity.
Solidarity.